Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, a national security podcast that provides you an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world and ask how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's December 16th, 2025. Let's get to it. Hey, Sue, how are you?
I'm good. I don't think you can really tell, but I am more festive here. I am
Oh,
more.
yeah, Christmas tree, Christmas lights in the fern or
Yeah,
the
yeah,
plant.
yeah. And
I don't mean to insult your plant.
uh, Christmas sweater. I think
Yeah.
I think I think we've rallied to the moment.
Mm.
Hey, big last weekend for you, Army Navy. Any reflections on your mids?
Oh, it was awesome. Go Navy, beat Army. The boys did great. It was a tough game, pretty sloppy. The ball was bouncing all over the field. Like a bad game that was always close and always competitive, and kind of what you expect from Army Navy. Always a slugfest. So super happy the Mids snuck out with a win.
Yeah, I would. I don't feel bad for Army. That would be impossible. I mean, I grew up too much in a Navy family. I mean,
Yeah.
I thought Army blankets were ugly just because they were Army blankets. But I will I will say Army's basically outperforming their resume the whole game.
Yeah. Hmm.
And and then it just was never gonna be enough. You just had that feeling all throughout. So, but on the other hand, great young women and men who choose to serve their country, there aren't any losers in the game, except Army
Yeah.
lost.
Yeah, super cool. You always see that at the end of the game, right, where
Right.
they're
Yeah,
slugging it out and
yeah.
in each other's faces the whole game, and then at the end, they're arm over arm,
Yeah,
singing each other's alma mater. But always prefer to sing second, right? Because
yeah,
that's goes to the victor. So
yeah. Did I hear it right that the national anthem was a joint Naval Academy and West Point Choir? Have they done that in the past? I thought it was
yeah, they do
lovely.
they do that they do that a lot of time. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's pretty. And those for like just random people off the street who are going to a service academy and then going to serve in the military, like usually have a pretty
beautiful.
decent choir, yeah, decent glee clubs. Yeah, some talented folks.
My favorite is I've heard the Naval Academy more than Army. Naval Academy choir, in the chapel is singing "Eternal Father, Strong to Save Us" about the most moving experience I've ever had. I mean, it just again, random people coming to a school and then they creating something so beautifully soaring
Right,
musically.
yeah, you're not being recruited to go to Juilliard, right?
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
yeah,
still the Naval
exactly.
Academy, and they show
Exactly.
up. And at Christmas time, they do Handel's Messiah. They do a really good job there. So kind of
Yeah.
reminds us of Christmas songs this time of year. Sue,
Christmas song.
you have some favorite Christmas songs you want to shout
I
out?
I do, following on our, Christmas movie theme. I love Christmas music. I was trying to decide what my number 1 would be, and I stumbled upon this in a playlist, and I remember that this might be my favorite, and that's Bare Naked Ladies' version of "God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen" with Sarah McLachlan. It's just a really you know me, I love an up-tempo song. It's a great song anyway, but it's a nice throwback to Canada, eh? And the Bare
Yeah,
Naked
sounds
Ladies.
like the '90s at its best. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Hey, listen, check it out. You all will love it. My girl Kelly Clarkson, love Underneath the Tree, love Mariah Carey, and All I Want for Christmas Is You. Kind of a random one from a random movie, is Dolly Parton singing, Hard Candy Christmas. What's random about it is it's from the movie Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, which is a really adorable musical. But check out Hard Candy Christmas. And again, Dolly Parton singing about kind of hard scrapple lives is just wonderful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then, this, Silent Night is just one of my very favorite hymns, songs. It's so beautiful, and the version sung by Trisha Yearwood and Reba McEntire and Kelly Clarkson is really pretty. And then before I turn it over to you to correct me on any of these, in honor of the late Jim Gordon, I will it's not Dominic the Christmas Donkey, although he really loved that one, and
Yeah.
it's not the Chipmunk song, although he really liked that one. There's this random, I think, awful song called "The Cat Carol," and then listen
Yep.
to it. It's by Maren Kendall, um, but That's in honor of you, Jim. You know, your memory lives on in really awful songs.
The cat curl is a special one. Be sure to follow it up immediately with a peppy version, maybe "God Rest You Merry Gentlemen," to pick
Yeah.
up your spirits because the cat carol's it's a little
Well,
dark there at the end for Christmas.
what did I miss?
I was gonna say, these are some deep pulls.
You
Great
know that
job.
that's the way we roll. We are
Yeah,
understandable insight, Sue and Eric, atypical. That's us, atypical.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Now for songs, I'll add, I'm into kind of the ballads these days. "Oh Holy Night" is up there for me. "Joy
Spectacular.
to the World," anyone you can just get going and get on a roll and start belting. "O Tannenbaum," you may know as "O Christmas Tree," is one of my favorites. And then, sorry to do this to you, but "Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer" is also quite popular.
It's great. No, Oh Holy Night is just soaring, right?
Yeah,
It's just soaring. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good, good. I think you might, I think if we took and did a shuffle of all our songs, that one might be at the top.
yeah.
Yeah.
UI playlist?
Yeah. Yeah, there we go. We'll start building one when we get time.
Yeah, right after I edit this
Right
episode.
after you edit this today.
Yeah,
Exactly.
alright. Well, then let's get to some headlines. The Department of Energy launched an AI Manhattan project, and President Trump followed with an executive order directing the Department of Justice to stop any state that gets in the way of federal AI leadership. Nvidia can sell China not the best H200s to keep the US stack out front, but only with a 25% toll booth attached. Finally, we'll look down under. Australia's world's first social media ban for kids, what a shift to their super retirement system could mean here, and how some of our international retirement dollars may be landing in places that run directly against U.S. national security interests.
Good set.
Yep. All right, so we'll start today. And before we get into the Genesis mission, just want to say that our thoughts and prayers are with the families and the communities affected down at Bondi Beach in Australia, particularly as we're going to talk about some of the Australian topics today with respect to social media and the kids and the retirement fund, thinking about the Senseless Terrorist Act over the weekend.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for bringing that up, Eric.
Yep. So we'll begin with the Genesis mission. President Trump on November 24th, so a few weeks ago, signed an executive order launching the Department of Energy to lead this Genesis mission, a national effort to use artificial intelligence and advanced computing to transform American science and innovation and strengthen the U.S. technological leadership. This initiative aims to double the productivity and impact of American science and engineering within a decade, with goals tied to energy dominance, faster scientific discovery, and national security. DOE plans to mobilize its 17 national laboratories with industry and academia to build an integrated discovery platform connecting supercomputers, AI systems, quantum, and advanced science instruments. They're going to focus in areas about advanced nuclear, fusion, grid modernization, etc. So it all sounds great. Sounds like a case study in federal science policy at scale. We're going to blend AI, national lab infrastructure, and long-term innovation strategy. Is this better than just sending our kids to STEM camp?
Yeah.
Maybe an enhancement. But Sue, is this an indication that someone in Washington, D.C. still has their head screwed on straight? Or what do you think about this release?
Yeah, I think it is strategically necessary and directionally correct. You and I talk a lot about what's the role of government, big problems, long time horizons, and deep pockets. I think this is a great example. I think the national lab infrastructure has historically been one of our most profound strengths and has been struggling to a bit to find an identity post the nuclear kind of the artifacts of the Manhattan Project. Not that there's not nuclear issues to be dealt with at the labs, but I'm just saying that I think it is a stronger piece of our infrastructure, and this could provide a really useful focus. Plus, there are institutions that know how to pursue big projects. So
Hmm.
in general, I think this is good government. Some likely benefits, scientific productivity at scale, gives us strategic competitiveness, and I think there are some public good spillovers. We've talked about why AI is something that really needs to be married up with national security interests writ large, in part because that community knows how to deal with risk and has demonstrated that. So I think that there are some real likely benefits out of this that are hard to argue with, or with which it is hard to argue. There we go. I got rid of my preposition at the end. There are, I think, though, some core risks, and I'd love your thoughts on this, and that is it really just integration theater where you have datas and models exist, but they're not embedded into scientific workforces, right? It's the classic, let's put a lot of money into something to build capability that sounds really good, and then we're expecting some miracle event for it to come together to produce the outcome we want. I would love to believe that this could be the kind of gravitational pull to force us to have new governance models that are not so onerous as the ones that we have currently in the government, but I worry about that, and I worry if there's no clear authority
Mhm.
to assure delivery, so that's another risk that has to be addressed. We're gonna talk about this throughout today's episode. I think we did last one as well. Talent mismatch between where the talent resides to pull this off and how you get it put on task. And then finally, I think it will really test us to have enough security concerns to make sure that AI is responsibly done in a manner that is very Western rather than the way China might approach this, and we can talk about that if we want to. That you don't have security overreach where it's just so you must prove everything first that you just simply don't move out. So I think good strengths, some core risks. What do you think?
I think it sounds like a great idea, and at the risk of sounding overly cynical, I was like, "Wait, did this come from the same administration that we've been talking about?" Like, this sounds like a really good yay, science, right? This sounds like exactly what you have the national labs to do, and
Right.
great that they're, geographically dispersed, right, from Idaho to New Mexico and throughout the country. Seems like a really great idea. One of my additional concerns, in addition to yours, are okay, we're just gonna slap down and say we're gonna double this. What
Yeah.
exactly are we doubling here? How are we doubling science? And I think maybe it'll get into more in DOE, we'll get into more of the weeds of how we're gonna actually quantify these metrics. We certainly need improvement, and this sounds like it's a great way to enhance our infrastructure across these areas, right? Between AI, nuclear, and all those. But just saying we're gonna double something, double from what?
Yeah, and I think I have too much scar tissue from new initiatives, more money, and then everyone takes their existing programs and they recode them against those initiatives without actually
Yeah.
developing new
Yeah.
initiatives. So I worry about that. I think there are a couple things that we might watch for, or if someone's listening to us, they could put it in. I think what's missing that would be good signs that this is going to be the positive version of what we hope for is one, you need some non-negotiable national outcomes. Like,
Yeah.
what are you trying to do? What is AI gonna deliver? So set up something, whether it is in the area of machines or pharmaceuticals or something that are going to pieces of electricity infrastructure that you're going to reduce the materials qualification timelines by 50%, right? Very reasonable things for AI to deliver. So I think some non-negotiable national outcomes. Uh, Back to the mission owner with authority. One, I think energy is one of our most profound critical infrastructure needs for all the reasons that we've said over previous podcasts. You would have to give the authority to the Department of Energy, and then you'd have to create a Department of Energy that was able to pull it off. And so, how do you put the talent in there? And then the last thing I'll just say is we talk about it all the time, but we have not yet demonstrated our ability to put together a public private partnership that delivers on the value proposition for both partners, right? Sometimes we talk about from a governmental perspective of a public-private partnership, which is the private sector is gonna do what the government wants without accounting for what the private sector needs. So those are the 3 things, and then human capital investment. But I like it. I think it's a great Uh, I I I hate to say a Manhattan Project, but I think AI is worthy of that kind of singular focus moniker. You just have to do it differently than you did the Manhattan Project.
Yeah. Interesting with the leadership piece, right? Because a lot of this AI stuff is falling under commerce right
Right.
now, and especially with what are we going to be able to sell to other countries, and we'll talk about the Nvidia H200s here in a little bit. Also, particularly with the leadership at the top of DOE right now, is very particular in terms of what energy is good, what is bad. Are we into renewables? Solar's woke. So I have a hesitation there as well, but I'm optimistic that this can be a good venture. Can you talk a little bit about the public-private partnership? Because are these labs, they're federally owned, right? They work with universities, so they get a lot of money from the government. But how does that kind of partnership and structure work, and how is that our advantage?
Well, I think the thing that you're gonna have to solve is the impedance mismatch between the speed at which things can be advanced in the private sector and the surety with which things can be advanced, with government
Yeah.
investment. And again, we haven't yet demonstrated what I think is a modern version of saying, "I want the private sector to participate, but I'm going to allow them to be successful in a private perspective." And one of the ways
Mhm.
to think about it is when we formed Incutel back in, wow, ancient history, 98, the revelation that allowed, I think, Incutel to be a successful venture partner, taking governmental imperatives, but building off the strength of the private sector was a big change. As you said, we weren't gonna own the intellectual property. And so what is the modern version of if you want the private sector to come in, you can't say you're not gonna make a gazillion dollars if you participate, whether you can't give away all their initiative of being a good business. So to me, that's where you need to bring the 2 security and speed together, but you won't do it if you're making the value prop being only one side or the other.
Well, that's on the build side. The other part of this is the regulation side. So last week, the White House issued the AI policy framework aimed at stopping this patchwork of state by state AI laws from shaping the national playing field. And it does it with pretty blunt instruments. It calls for minimally burdensome national AI framework and argues that fragmented state regulation can slow innovation and complicate compliance. We've talked about this before. Creates an AI litigation task force at the Department of Justice, whose sole job is to challenge state AI laws deemed inconsistent with the order's policy and directives. Commerce to publish an evaluation identifying onerous state AI laws within 90 days. And it also ties federal leverage to compliance, so directing limits on certain BEAD broadband funds and encouraging agencies to condition discretionary grants. So BEAD is a broadband equity access and deployment program. Back in 2021, there was a 42.45 billion federal grant that was run by Commerce infrastructure to help get high-speed internet to unserved and underserved areas by funding that last mile of broadband. This EO also enforces some compliance through some other FCC and FTC actions and a legislative proposal aimed to preempt conflicting. So essentially withholding monies to the states if they aren't compliant with
Right.
this EO and with national AI regulation. What do you think, Sue?
Yeah, I think the Trump administration is right that, that America can't afford fragmented AI governance, right?
Yeah.
And I think the BEAD program is a good example of how the government has tried to manage those 2 things of federal government doing what it can do, kind of standard settings and values centric, but then releasing the money for implementation. And that's
Hmm.
in my head, that's the way you think of it, right? That's even a way to think about foreign policy is shared values, good framework for governance, but allowing for difference in implementation that keeps the competitive pieces going. Again, this is 2 in a row that I think the administration got right, is that this idea that fragmentation is dangerous, that speed certainly matters. We are actually in a strategic competition with China, and we could talk more about that. And China has some natural advantages in speed. I think we have natural advantages in innovation and long-term success, but speed is mattering right now.
Hmm.
And so if you let just everyone do their own thing, I'm not sure you're gonna get to the outcome, you want. And maybe AI is just one of those, critical technologies where frontier AI belongs at the federal level, just to kind of set that standard. Interesting, we're talking about it now governmentally. It's a conversation you and I have had about why I don't think market forces alone leaving frontier AI to the private sector, I don't think is a good thing
Right.
or sufficient thing. I think there are some areas. I'm kind of back in my sets of 3 things today. I think there's some areas where this approach is, I hate to say wrong, it's risky. If you preempt with allowing some sort of substitution, in other words, if the only power is to stop a state from doing something without establishing enforceable rules that leave some accountability and pathway to resolution, what you're gonna have is you're just gonna have a different kind of jumble of things that aren't getting you there. I'm not sure the voluntary standards are sufficient, but I'm not sure that imposing one point of view, as you and I have talked about the cultural issues that are embedded in AI or point of view or political issues have to be managed. And, I I think it's possible, you're gonna laugh when I say this next sentence. I think it's possible that national security is being over-invoked.
Ha.
I know, but I think it's possible, right? We talk a lot about concerns that are important to the nation,
Hmm.
but too often, especially this administration, invokes national security as some reason to be prescriptive or prohibitive or punitive. I can't believe I came up with 3 Ps just off the top of my head. And so I I I think, yes, it is a national interest, but to put it in the national security bin, I'm not sure is as going to be effective. It's the same thing as we were talking about Genesis AI. I think there's a real good reason that you want energy or commerce to be involved in this rather than the more comfy Department of Defense where we're
Hmm.
really sure about national security. Yes, but they tend to be more narrow than I think this moment allows. If we want to talk about what looks maybe better than this is some kind of tiered authority or clear liability rules. Maybe there's a federal floor, not a federal ceiling. I think those are the kind of things that would make it work. But I don't think they're wrong to say that this is a technology for which unfettered fragmentation is gonna serve us.
Yeah, I think you don't want to slow down innovation,
Right.
right? I think this is still showing that regulation, the federal government is involved. It's not just completely handing it over to the private sector, like you said. And I like that it's early, right? I don't think that this DOJ task force is going to have a ton to do right now because I don't think a whole lot of states
Right.
have too much AI law that conflicts with AI policy or anything. So by getting this out early, on the other hand, you can look at it and say, well, this looks like some of the other things the administration's been doing in terms of targeting different groups and going after certain states and, weaponizing the Department of Justice, so to speak. But I think that this more says, hey, no, we're serious about this. We're keeping it at the federal level. Let's not have a patchwork of laws that we have to make all these AI companies comply with 50 different regulations because that's going to slow us down in this AI race. So I'm drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, and I do see, I've mocked, um, this administration for what I deem is it's saying it's transparent, and I see no fiscal transparency or transparency on Venezuelan boats or other things. But
Yeah.
the things we've talked about today, this is actually how you build transparency, right? You put these things out there rather than just putting your thumb on the scale and say, we're going to go to company X to deliver capability Y, and that's it. Right. So I think I kind of put this in the bin of what technology transparency looks like. And remember, we are still trying to overcome as a nation a world in which critical technologies were those which we developed inside of the government. And
Mhm.
and we knew how to control those and to govern those things and to make sure that we were getting to the place we wanted to be as a nation. I think you have to put this kind of intention out there in order for the discussion to issue forth about how we're gonna do it differently. Again, maybe I'm just in an optimistic mood of the season, but I don't mind this, even if I think there are some areas that are fraught with peril. And again, if you decided you were gonna be punitive, you could do real damage with this.
Positivity episode.
Yeah,
Like
there we
it.
go.
Yeah, I wonder also, I'm not gonna derail us. I'm just gonna mention this for next time or some future time. But if this isn't lessons learned from the World Wide Web and the internet
Yeah.
and some of the regulating it. I don't have a whole lot of detail on this, but I think we were kind of slow in terms of as that was developing, how that technology was gonna get implemented and how the federal government was gonna be involved, right? And so seems like we're a little bit leaning on the front side of this one.
Well, okay, let's just put a second little tab on your marker that you put down for the future is I do think that these are international issues. It is important that we have a view of what we need as a sovereign nation. It is also important to recognize if any of this is gonna work, you're gonna have to have some agreement at the international level, and we still haven't shown that we're really good at that. So maybe this is also a precursor to being able to have what I think will turn out to be very difficult conversations when it comes to how you control AI, within the constraints of various sovereign interests.
Well, one of the ways in which you can do that is make sure that they're on the US stack and buying US technology, right? So,
Again, and you have to be more purposeful about that in 2025 because there is so much good technology everywhere that if we sleep on that obligation and opportunity, then someone else will step in 5G, right? So you have to be purposeful about saying that US leadership is important. US participation in international bodies is important, and that's a new skill set for us because we just didn't have to do that.
mhm, yep, because we were the default standard
Yep.
setter, right?
Yep.
Yeah, well, that's this next story about
Yeah.
Nvidia being poised to regain access to China market for the H200. The Trump administration signaled it will allow exports under Commerce Department oversight, but there's a 25% surcharge and fee attached to those sales. The permission is framed as a compromise. The U.S. keeps tighter restrictions on NVIDIA's newer, more powerful Blackwell chips, while letting China buy a prior generation part that's still highly capable and in high demand. This continues to be the playbook. Don't force China to go fully indigenous and innovate faster than necessary. If you can sell them a powerful but not cutting edge chip under tight oversight, you keep Chinese AI developers building on US hardware stack, you preserve some leverage and visibility, and you reserve the very top end capability for the US and close allies. But H200 is still a very capable compute. Even if it's not best, you're still increasing China's advanced AI capability. While we may gain leverage, China gains time, scale, and learning effects. Plus, there's always diversion and enforcement risk. We talked about the NASCAR analogy before, where one company builds most of the motors, but you decide that you're going to be able to win based on other car designs and your operators. So, do you still like these sales?
Yeah, I think you can't long for a simpler time, right? I think we all the things we just said about you've heard me say this before, every technology is available to everyone. It's the one that puts it to use faster. Capability development is getting closer and closer. There are lots of good reasons for US leadership, and so you can't pretend that we can affect that leadership without participating globally. I don't care how isolationist you wanna be, that just isn't gonna work. So,
Yeah.
whether I like it or not, whether I see risk to it or not, I just don't think you have a different approach. So now how do you do it in a way that minimizes your risk? So, lots of good things about it. We've talked about it on various other technologies, whether it's the leadership or you're preventing some of the market substitution where you allow foreign investment and then they scoop that technology away and take it away from the US. And it gives us some chance to maintain visibility in terms of what the capabilities are. So those are the good things, and we cite them over and over. I think you and I are on the non-isolationist side.
Yeah.
That said, you have to be clear-eyed about how you're putting this into play. There is no doubt that when you sell these things, you are improving the capabilities of our adversaries and competitors. China's a great example. They're gonna be able to train their models better, they're gonna optimize it, and they're gonna get system
Hmm.
integration expertise. I also think and there have been a lot of conversations about this within the government, is it's not the technology that you worry about, it's the end use, but I gotta tell you, monitoring end use is a very complex, very sporty thing to do.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that things aren't being reconfigured or being used in the way? So and I also think that selling to China is a mixed signal to our allies and partners who we put lots of pressure on to not sell to the exact same people we're now saying we're gonna sell. So eh, I don't think those are equivalent mitigators that say you don't do it, but I think they're certainly things that you have to attend to. And then there are just some, I think, kind of some ugly sides to this that just have to do with the slowness of our own system and how focused some of our adversaries are and how quickly they can take in some cases, they can take technology that we've developed and put it into their use faster than we can put it into our use. And so when you do this, I think you're running that risk. But again, I don't think there's a different choice to be made. I just think you have to be very clear-eyed and then maybe come up with some additional things like, time-bounded licenses or aggregation limits, or if you wanna go to use, you gotta telemeter the systems that you put our technology into. I think I think those are hard to enforce, but
Hmm.
maybe it's worth the effort to try and put some of those governors are on that are not prohibition governors, but actually how you can aggregate them into some greater capability. And keep on having friends. Like, really tackle this issue of I think if you are some of our friends globally,
Yeah.
you're saying, "Wait a minute, they're they're getting a better deal with our strategic partner than we are." And so I think you really have to keep investing in allies and partners if you're going to do this selling to those people who would be perceived as adversaries and competitors.
Yep. You gotta have a good relationship with Nvidia to understand what exactly is going out, and a lot of responsibility on the Commerce Department, right? Check that in state that you're talking about to figure out what exactly they're doing with it. Are they getting more advanced? Is China moving ahead in this race by us giving them the 200s? Should we sell them the H201 or the H202 in subsequent iterations, right? So a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, well, Eric, you pulled out my soapbox, now I'm gonna have to stand on it. Um, I
You're welcome.
there you've just mentioned one of the reasons why we need our best and brightest to be want to come and work as part of the professional cadre in the government. Suggesting that that is not worthy of our best talent or worse is somehow malfeasant and populated by people who are trying to make a buck on somehow the public's dime. The effect of that is you have less capable institutions at exactly the moment that even this administration is saying we need great government.
Hmm.
And not only do we need great government, we need revolutionary government. We need to reimagine how we affect federal government. And so, come on, guys, get all your signals together. And one of them is it's the thing I've said for years, which is the best first 5 years of any student's work life would be spent in the national security sector that now includes energy, commerce, and so many things. So
Hmm.
I think if the administration wants to signal that this is where we're going, that we're gonna kind of beef up, you have to have a concurrent effort to say, "And we think this is a place that the best talent should wanna come," as it always has, by the way.
Do you want to talk any more about 5G and how we kind of missed the opportunity on 5G and how we could win 6G, even though it lets you video
Jeez.
scan through your skin?
Yeah, I think the message on 5G is a lot what we're talking about here is what you had was a critical technology in 5G and critical to the kinds of national interests of how we develop our infrastructure, how we move information, how we provide resilience. And we left it to the private sector to decide how they were going to invest their dollars in that technology. And one of the decisions that the private sector made, which doesn't seem on its surface unreasonable, is we want to offshore the foundational things that tend not to be high profit, and we want to keep the high profit things for ourselves. And what happened was we basically gave away baseband technology. We are really struggling to get it back, and it's not just a security issue, but it is an economic issue as well. So we better get on with 6G because we lost the 5G piece for both the sales globally, because you had China come in with a really good technology. Don't argue with me about whether it's the best. It was certainly good enough, especially at the price point they were able to
Yeah.
offer. And the West basically pulled back from that and didn't have a functioning competitor, including within the United States. That BEAD program that you talk about, if you want to talk about localities making decisions about how they add broadband so that they can effect what they need to locally, they were buying Huawei
Hmm.
because it was performant and affordable. So I think the 5G, 6G example is really this issue of what are in our national interests. How do we need to engage the private sector to first understand that national interest in case they were missing that point? And then how do we allow them to participate that it doesn't keep them on some island that is never going to allow them to penetrate the market that is going to transport the technology forward? So I think it's a great example. But these things that we've just talked about could be transportation for us, but you have to affect them in a different way than we typically prefer.
Yep. Maybe that 25% toll booth and excise will be added bonuses for recruiting talent to the federal cadre. Who knows?
Yep, yep.
Probably not.
Maybe not, but even in your glibness, that's the kind of thing that has to be considered. You just have to, and we've talked about this today, and it's kind of the drum we beat a lot, is it doesn't work if you don't have a whole ecosystem of policies and reinforcing investments to make an outcome happen. You can make yourself really feel awfully good with a couple $1 billion of foreign investment is something that you think is important given to a company that can perform, but without the ecosystem around it in order to turn into national advantage, you won't have done much good.
Yep. Just trying to balance out your positivity.
Well, you did it. Now I'm depressed. Let's go on to something else.
Well, let's talk about the Australian world's first child social media ban. So it's Australia's under 16 social media restriction began last week, forcing major platforms to remove existing under 16 accounts and block new signups in Australia, or they risk fines up to 49.5 million Australian dollars. Enforcement is being monitored by the e-safety commissioner, and early issues include age verification errors, some workarounds, their parents helping their kids evade the restrictions. But ultimately, proponents say this will reduce harm to children's mental health and well being in still developing brains, anxiety, self harm content, doom scrolling. And Prime Minister Albanese, his analogy is to the drinking age. He wrote that Australia sets the legal drinking age at 18 because our society recognizes the benefits to the individual and the community of such an approach. Critics, however, cite free speech, and some also argue beyond the addiction harm debate, social media is where many kids, especially those with niche interests or marginalized identities, including LGBTQ plus youth, find community, belonging, and support they may not have locally. I'd like to welcome the Commonwealth of Australia to this previously instituted policy in my own household. We've talked before about how security is about systems, trust, information, resilience, and we've described the information environment as a domain where social media data can be used for influence advantage against free societies. So, what do you think about this ban, and do you think it's something we should consider adopting nationally here in the United States?
So I like the ban. I like the action against something that we know is a problem. I actually like the taking on of a kind of a sacrosanct belief in terms of freedom of speech, because that has been used in other varieties that have been used to keep us from getting to the future we need to get to. And
Hmm.
I don't think when you need to do something different, you can carry with you all the things you've always done. So I think information quality, especially when perpetrated on developing minds, or lack of quality when perpetrated on a bunch of developing minds, is a problem. We know it is. And I admire Australia for tackling this, much as they tackled guns in 1996. And that flew in the face of personal freedoms too. But you're just deciding where the greater risk is and not allowing yourself to not tackle an issue just because you have to make a choice about where the greater risk lies. And I think what Australia has said, the greater risk lies in an unconstrained social media environment that are causing harm to our children. I hope what happens is that you see some really cool advances that tackle the problem that you suggest, which is how do you still form communities in whether for isolated communities geographically, or isolated in terms of culture, or isolated in terms of just uh, how outgoing you are. There's some version of a public square. There's some version of a library that can provide that. I hope that what comes from this is new means for people to connect while still putting some constraints on, because the downsides are really obvious. We all know them whether we want to address them or not, and I think Australia has been a leader in this before, and I like that they're being a leader again.
Yep. Yeah, I like Albany's analog a lot about the alcohol.
Listen, I think there are clever solutions, and I'm just on the record on saying that there is an element of willful subordination of personal interests in order to create the kind of society we want.
Hmm.
One of the things that we lost when the world became digital, when everything came exactly to our doorsteps, and I didn't have to go through middle men and women in order to get something, is we started thinking that I could have whatever I wanted without thinking about the deleterious effect of that kind of defeat of the tragedy of the commons. And so I admire it, and they'll figure it out. Listen,
Hmm.
they're actually in the aftermath of Bondi Beach. Australia is has very quickly turned to saying, where did we not do enough in terms of gun laws?
Right.
Right. So these are not things that you can ever get right and hold
Hmm.
forever. You have to keep looking at the outcome. I feel like a broken record on outcome, but it really is outcome that matters.
Yeah.
So I admire it. I think it's a good play, and I think people who suggest that it is against free speech, I think there's an absolutism that on that front, that if you hold on to it too tightly, you will not have the society you want.
Yep. Well, one of the other things we're looking at Australia for and being a leader in is their retirement system. President Trump saying he's looking very seriously at Australia's compulsory superannuation superannuation retirement system.
I can't
Australia,
say it. God bless you. Thank you for
yeah,
taking that on. Think annuity, right?
yeah, they just call it super. It's basically a mandatory employer-funded retirement account layered alongside a separate public pension. It started in the early 90s with employers contributing about 3% of wages, 4% for some larger payroll employers. And today, the required employer rate is 12% of ordinary time earnings. Workers can also top it up involuntarily, either before tax or after tax. But the compulsory part is the employer driven, and the money is invested in a super fund until retirement access rules kick in. The before tax general cap as of 2024 was $30,000 a year, and then after tax top offs can go up to $120,000 per year. But critics argue this will squeeze workers and result in lower take home pay. 12% sounds like a lot, but that's the policy choice. Originally, Australia started at 3%, and they elevated since the 90s. And in the US, employers already pay a meaningful retirement health payroll wedge that's 7.65%. So 6.2% comes from Social Security contribution and 1.45% comes from Medicare contribution. Economists generally expect the cost of employer mandates to be shared with workers over time via wages, but the question is where it goes and whether workers will see it and own it. Importing the super risks expanding government influence over the capital markets as well. So, Sue, what do you think about this part of Australia system?
So let's save that last point about who has control and what that money gets used for and
Yeah,
what rest you're putting to the back end of this conversation. I think we know in the US that there's goodness to this approach. What we've tried to do is to use our Social Security that um, is something that people can count on, and we have recognized that as structured, it is either insufficient or likely to go away, and so
yeah,
you've seen the rise of the 401(k)s and thrift saving plans and all sorts of benefits. The problem is that latter approach of 401(k)s is too voluntary, too fragmented, not guaranteed, not universally put into play, and so is it really providing enough of the financial resilience that leads to a nation that's thriving in its population, not just in its GDP. So I think we've known that what we have with Social Security isn't enough. That's what we did when we started adding on 401(k)s. I think we now see that that just isn't enough.
hmm
So here's my idea. I think Social Security is a good floor, and for all the reasons you say, I think it would be hard to instantaneously say, okay, today we're going to go to something like a Australia's super because the contribution on business owners is just so profound.
yeah,
And then if you're not going to have them cover it all, then you're going to have workers saying, whoa, 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 whoa. Let me make a decision about how much money I'm saving because that's
hmm
what this is. So I think you could phase it in. There are a lot of good things about it. You even see this administration kind of talking about it when you talk about savings accounts. It's not quite as organized. There's not quite as much of, the employee individual control over that. That's more of a governmentally centric program.
hmm
I tend to like ones where the government sets the framework, but market forces are allowed to come into play. So I'm going to give this another thumbs up, even though Australia's implementation is likely not going to be able to work for us in one step. If we made it incremental in a weird sort of way, almost like Australia did, I think it could help it. I think you would need professional governance. You're going to have it anchored by Social Security, but not the same program. I think it could work. And then I'm just going to go to the last point you made, which is you're almost starting to see it as a large pool of capital that could be used as an instrument of national and foreign policy. And, almost as almost sovereign wealth fundy as you and I
hmm
have talked about. The question there would be how do you protect it so that it's not put at tremendous risk? And do we have the mechanisms to do that? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's certainly worth exploring. I don't believe Social Security will be there for me. I'm not planning for it to be. So I think we have to do something and plan to phase it out. Additionally, if you look at our budget and how much money we're spending, that is a huge bulk of it is the contribution of Social
Yep.
Security and Medicare implementation. So by being able to phase some of that out and put the burden on the employers, which the burden already exists. It's already at 7%. You're just shifting that around. And folks say that that'll affect wages. Sure, that'll get adjusted over time. But that'll get baked in just like Social Security and Medicare is. I think that to the point of regulation, who's managing the money, if I have a choice of being able to put that in a Vanguard or an SPY, that's my choice versus, it just goes in the government. And then
Right.
who's making how much authority do I have as I want to adjust
Right,
my risk tolerance, right? When I'm
right.
30 years old and this is getting put in my employer, I want to be very aggressive because I got the long time horizon. But as I'm getting older, I'm planning for retirement. Am I able to adjust that on a risk adjusted basis better? You should be able to do that. It's just these are just areas that we could foul it up. And then my other question for you is, does this scale, right? Australia has about 30 million people, right? Or it's considerably less. It's an order of magnitude larger population in the United States compared to Australia. And how does that scale?
Yeah, so I think where the scaling breaks down is what you just said. Yes, Eric Kep, you absolutely should be able to manage your risk and make choices for you. But when you have a massive population, and if one of the things that it does provide is kind of economic resilience of your entire population, if you're going to give them all the flexibility that you just articulated, doesn't work at 350 million people in the same way it does. So I think you're gonna have to have some tempering that way. But again, what I like about it, and again, I don't think you could just lift and shift Australia's program, but we have got to do something about the economic resilience of our population and the disparities between folks. Social Security was a really wonderful idea. It isn't doing what it was expected. It's not
Right.
sustainable within the budget, and it isn't delivering. It might deliver some income, but it isn't a sustainable income. So I I I think it's a good time in a lot of different domains for us to reimagine what government looks like, what private responsibility looks like, and what personal responsibility looks like, and then come up with some balance there that works with the high-minded ideals of making sure that we can take care of all the people that we have while still allowing, the underlying fundamentals of a free market system. And so that means we need people who can create. And to me, that's what the most frustrating thing about these times is we have to embrace that we can't just keep evolving the systems we have. We have to reimagine, and who are those people that believe it's their responsibility to do more than act for themselves. But I believe in us.
Yeah.
We just have to see it. And in that regard, Australia is a great model, right? They're one of our closest partners. They're a free and open society. Yes, maybe they're smaller, but what are the principles that allow them to design a system themselves? And let's take on some of those principles and just make them work for us.
Yeah. I'm sure it's not perfect down there either, but certainly worth exploring. I think a lot of optimism to be had there. But you also got to worry about where the money goes, right?
Right.
So this next story from the New York Times Ops Ed argues that even boring retirement accounts, especially big government ones, can end up financing activities that run straight against U.S. foreign policy and national security goals, often without participants even realizing it.
Right.
So this gentleman, Jonathan Hillman, describes trying to figure out where the holding of his federal government's thrift saving plan, or TSP you mentioned before, went, especially in the International Index Fund, the I fund of the TSP. He found that the fund discloses only its top holdings, so leaving thousands of other positions opaque. He filed a Freedom of Information request to see what was inside, and he said the data he obtained showed retirement savings from government employees and military members can indirectly support China's techno industrial ambitions, not necessarily by investing in China, but by investing in firms elsewhere that partner with Chinese entities the U.S. has sanctioned or blacklisted. He had a couple examples. In Bangkok, American savings are supporting Grad International Hospital, which last year strengthened its partnership with the Chinese genomics giant BGI. And then on Singapore's main stock exchange, China's largest privately owned shipbuilding company, Yangzheng Shipbuilding Holdings, which produced ships that could be mobilized to support Chinese military operations. And the U.S. government has named in an investigation of Chinese discriminatory trade practices as having investment. So we tried to stop a little bit of this back in 2019. Senator Rubio and Senator Shaheen, along with some U.S. House companions, introduced the Taxpayers and Savers Protection (TSP) Act, aimed at preventing TSP, the federal military retirement, from steering money into China-linked securities, especially via the I fund. They argue to create a national security problem when public servants' pensions indirectly funded strategic competitors. So, is the results of this finding and some of this investigation just the trade-off of having a global economy? Is it really hard to invest internationally and not find links to Chinese companies? Or could we be more deliberate in some of these investments?
Oof. Oof, what a big topic. We should be more deliberate. The US government, if it purports to be the manager of a fund, I think it is reasonable for individuals to believe that that is done in a manner that allows them to have confidence in their assets, right? Do I do I think that it's reasonable that, with the exception of deciding that you don't want to participate in a fund, it is reasonable for every single one of our 350 million individuals to have a fund that is investing according to their particular values and mores? I don't know how that works.
Me neither.
So, it's a trade, right? You can take all the risks personally and make all the decisions personally, and we know that with that approach, we haven't created a private net that people can tap into. And while I always believe that if you're participating with the US government, you ought to have some assurance that the activities are conducted against a matrix of national interests that are articulated, so that they can be scrutinized to make sure they comport with the values of the United States. Transparency that I'm generally in favor of. I I So if it's a government fund, you ought to be able to understand how it's being spent. Yeah, I think it is unreasonable to want the security of a government fund and to expect that every one of your values is met by that. Even as I believe that national values must always be discussed, and wouldn't it be nice if we had a Congress that allowed us to have conversations like that with the American people through our representative republic?
Sounds like a magical place.
I guess that's what I'm saying, right? I think that for us, the United States right now, what the American people said in many recent elections was the government isn't good enough for them. It isn't performing as well as it was. What it can't be is magical and doing what every single person needs without any authority and responsibility that the individual exerts. How do you strike that balance between those things which are governmental being adherent to a standard? I'm in favor of that. How do you have a conversation about what that standard is? That's why we have three branches of government. And then you have individuals that get to make a choice of, do you want the security of a governmental interest or do you want ultimate flexibility on your own personal interests? And that's what we're just trying to balance. And I think the conversation we had on Australia's program is it's trying to have features of both. I will say that that conversation is as sure a way for us not to make progress, because if we can't make it perfect, we're not gonna do it, and then we're gonna have the system that doesn't provide you Social Security in the future, or people who invest privately to have enough of a foundation. Gotta give
Yeah.
something up. Gotta give something up.
Yeah, I think the fund managers could do a better job.
Sure.
Um, I appreciate the returns, but I'd prefer not to be supporting and invest and funding the shipbuilding holdings of China. And I think that's what it comes down to, right? You got to follow your own money, make your own personal investment decisions.
Right.
But you would naturally think that the government's retirement fund would not invest in, you know, strategic adversaries.
100%. 100%. Again, see soapbox number 1 as opposed to 3, 4, 5, and 6. It says, yeah, the government's gotta be worthy. And and if it is done in the name of the government, people have an expectation that it's done to standard.
Yeah.
That's what transparency is about, and that's what oversight is about, and so I'm hoping that the same people that want that are having problems with what isn't being transparent now. But you and I see it the same, and we hold more responsibility on governmental things, but we have to find different systems and different approaches that scale.
Yep. Well, what else are you watching?
Oh, goodness. There are just so many things going on right now. There are the farmers, and are we gonna take the supposed money that we've taken in on tariffs, even though I have no idea where that money is or how they're gonna decide who it goes to, and whether we're gonna bail out the farmers and whether that's the right thing to do. On the one hand, you and I wax eloquent on the importance of agriculture to national strength and resilience, and we talk about what's happening to farms. I I don't have any good fix on what money we're talking about, what the source is. Is it gonna come from? Do I know that it actually came into the nation? What are the other trades that we have? What's the long-term program? Are there other investments that we can make in order to do it? Is this a one-time payment? Haven't
Yeah.
we made those before? Wasn't that done in the first administration? So, yeah, there are a lot of things I don't like about it, although I will say agriculture is an element of US security and strength.
Hmm.
And it has been harmed, but I'm not sure that this one-time payoff fixes the underlying problems that we've talked about in previous episodes.
And do we expect that for next year, right? Because it is focused primarily on the row crops, soybeans and corn. And then I think the funding's supposed to come from the USDA's Commodity Credit Corporation, but where do they get backfilled from that $12 billion? And then, yeah, do farmers expect that again next year?
Yeah, I like let's see, what else are we watching? You and I have had an offline conversation about GenAI.mil,
Yeah,
um, which I think it fits in today's theme, which, I kinda like it. I mean, Google is a great example of something that was developed by DARPA, against the standards of security standards of the department, that achieved scale by working within the government and then became the foundation for a technology that's put on the outside. If that's what GenAI.mil is is gonna do, then I say, it's not a bad idea. On the other hand, back to the transparency thing, anything done for the government has gotta have, standards and traceability and assurance behind it, and I don't know that we have been wowed by that transparency that has come out of this department. So, yay, unless. How about you?
I think it's great. I think get it out there, let people start using it. You get some training data and things that you can use on future models and iterate.
Yeah.
More is supposed to come, right? This is going to be unclassified and controlled unclassified data. But one of the funny things, and it does not shock me in the slightest, that one of the first things that military members did when getting access to this reports or access to this Gen AI was putting in a test prompt of a hypothetical commander. If we're to order a
Yeah.
second missile strike on two survivors clinging to wreckage from an initial strike on a suspected drug boat, what would you do? Would that violate the UCMJ or the law of armed conflict? And the Gen AI responded that the described actions would violate DoD policy and LOAC, calling the order to kill the survivors unambiguously illegal and something a service member would be required to disobey. So, kind of
And
interesting and timely there.
yeah, so again, I don't think I
Hallucination.
I don't think technology. I'm a big AI advocate because I don't think it replaces humans. I
Yeah.
think I think vision and accountability and limitations all come from humans. I think what this will help is the companies that are trying to offer their wares and their approaches to the military. It provides an environment where you could test it in some common sense without selling it to every single unit in the US military. So I think there's a lot of good about it. But as with anything, we keep on thinking that investment in technology is gonna solve the challenges we have, and it's not. It's the use and the outcomes that are really the differentiators that we underinvest in.
Yep. Yeah, and I just think back to just the daily admin life of things that you need to do in the government and how much I use ChatGPT and other AI tools in my daily life now to speed up. Wouldn't be able to do that on the military system where you have to be pulling over your personal and then there's controlled information and stuff like that. So
Right.
having this resource to be able to build schedules, manage lists, just all the tactical type stuff. I think there's great advantage and opportunity there.
And whatever you generate can be used in whatever command that it has. I mean, the good thing about
Yep.
this is that you're not building infinite varieties of things that don't work together.
Yep. For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I'd say as with our whole theme, direction of goodness with things that have to be worked out.
Yep. A couple other things I saw. The ACA extension vote
Yep.
failed in the Senate as expected. And then teased Chile's presidential election last week. It was won by the right-wing candidate, Jose Antonio Cast. He won with about 58% of the vote. And then also teased last week the WSIS plus 20 internet sovereignty bit. They're having their big vote this week on whether to adopt their outcome document. But the latest version it reaffirms multi stakeholder internet governance and explicitly frames the internet as a critical of global facility that must remain open, interoperable, stable, and secure. So we'll see if that gets approved and what, if anything, comes out of it from the U.S. side.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many interesting things going on right now. I do see a good forward lean into a lot of the issues, um, probably more that are the intersection between technology and federal government than yet technology and local government. And similarly, I don't see all the same efforts are going on between US and allies and partners, but a lot of good forward press into technology areas that are gonna intersect each. I guess the last thing I'm watching, and this is just a moment of personal privilege. Okay, I I I think public service is one of the areas of highest calling, and I expect leaders in public service to demonstrate the highest standards in terms of how it treats people. We've talked a lot about how people should think when they go to voting booths about what issues are important to them.
Hmm.
I I think how leadership is affected, not just what leadership affects, is something that when it is invoked in the name of public service has to be really attended to. It troubles me when public servants don't carry that responsibility of having a standard for how people are interacted with. And I think that's just one of the things that we can all insist on in our public service, not looking past that to say, "Yeah, but I like the thing they're doing." Too often at the end of the day, what you do and how you do it come together in either good or bad ways. So, I'm watching that.
Choose kindness.
Choose kindness every day. It's always good, especially from someone who's in a leadership position. And then, I think for the new year, Eric, I want to introduce a more literal version of what we're watching periodically.
Yeah.
And that is, what are we actually watching in the theaters or on TV? I think as I was going through kind of the topics today, I thought, what would I say in terms of the movies that I'm watching? Chernobyl is one, which is the aggregation of government power and the suppression of alternative views. That's a really good reminder of how bad that goes. Billion Dollar Code on Netflix is a really good example of the entrepreneur spirit in small companies and how easily it can be gobbled up by the big guys. And then to this last point that we had, there's a Netflix show called Unknown Killer Robots, which is really just talking about the advent of technology that is so advanced that it can take actions for itself. So I think we ought to introduce what movies we're watching.
All right.
Alright.
Yeah, mine's gonna be a little going a different direction. It's like I read over 1,000 books last year. Yeah, that's because they were all like 5 pages long and they were children's board books. Yeah, we're watching a lot of Phineas and Ferb and Super Wings on Amazon Prime. So yeah.
Now, if I were as quick as you, I would explain to you how all those things are actually, evidence of a correct foundation for society and kindness, but I'm not as quick as you are on Die Hard, so I'll work on that. I like the 5,000 books, all 5 pages long, great job.
All right. Well, that's what we're watching. Thank you for joining us, and no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, and government, but in its people.
As always, remember, we're here for you. Look for a link in the show notes to provide feedback or to suggest topics. We're always open, even if we don't always follow suggestions. Listen in next week to the Understandable Insights podcast, wherever you find it. And as always, go forth, do good, and for goodness sakes, be kind to one another. It makes a difference.